Welcome back, everybody. Today's going to be an interesting day. We are chatting with somebody who is not only an abduction experiencer, but also claims to have received information and some scientific data of a person who isn't a scientist. And Jason, I think you've heard of other stories similar to this too, right? People getting downloads of...
Yeah, absolutely. There was I'm not going to take too long here, but there's a gentleman by the name of David Hamill here in Canada that had a similar experience at the age of 67, actually. And he was building basically a UFO in his garage by the time he was in his 80s with an anti-gravitational intention. Like he was putting all this money and effort into building this thing with after having an experience. So this is not uncommon.
Yeah. And it's just another one of our angles that we're approaching. It's been a long, busy week. I know I had a long week.
Oh, it's been long. It's been a long week.
Today we're doing four recordings. We mentioned a few months ago that we are booked into the summer. We actually are. In fact, we may have to take a month off, Jay, and just
just recuperate.
Go on vacation.
Go on the spa.
But before we do, we need to learn how to build a flying saucer.
Absolutely.
And today's guest actually authored a book called How to Build a Flying Saucer. Very cool. Not as out there as you might think. Very intelligent man. We'll be right back with Mr. Michael ALANS right after our intro music right here on UAP Studies Podcast. Welcome back to another episode of UAP Studies Podcast. My name is Louis Borges. Joining me as always, my best buddy, Jason Guillemette. How you doing?
I'm doing good. It's been a long week, like I explained in the intro. But I'm happy to be here this weekend. We got some for the listeners. Actually, Louis and I are recording 4 interviews this weekend, so we're busy boys. A lot of good stuff is coming on the podcast. Really good guests, and today is no exception to the rule. And Louis, I'll let you introduce our guest.
Yeah. So you mentioned earlier before we started recording here that I tend to be more the science-minded guy into the quantum level of things, and you're more wanting to know about the abduction phenomenon and interaction. And today's guest kind of lives in both of those realms. As a result of one came another. So very exciting to chat with our guest today, Michael ALANS, the author of 2 books. We'll explain a little bit about those books, and it's a unique position. Not a lot of people can say that they've received this type of information. So we're looking forward to a good show. It's going to be a fun day. So welcome to the show, our new friend, Michael ALANS.
Hi, it's great to be here. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, thanks for being here. So a lot of people may not know about you unless they've read your books. So let's get to know a little bit about yourself, kind of what happened, and how did that lead into your now authoring and the things you're writing about?
Right. It goes all the way back to the early 80s. Throughout my early childhood, I remember being abducted by aliens from a bedroom fairly regularly, all the way up to about age 30, mid-30s. I think it was like 2008 when it stopped, just suddenly stopped. In that time, I had very broad range of experiences with lots of different entities. Some of the experiences were absolutely terrifying. I mean, literally some of the worst experiences of my life. And some of them were just amazing, just brilliant. It's crazy, but I feel like I've met quite a broad range of characters, non-human characters, which is quite strange to say. And from all those experiences, I feel like I've garnered some information. How I've garnered that information, I'm not exactly sure. I feel like it's come from like an altered state. So throughout my life, I've been trying to dip into my experiences. I've been regressed 3 times, and I've spent quite a lot of time using meditation to try and just dig deeper into the subject. And from that work, I feel like I've uncovered some really rather unusual information, which I've tried to share. The strange thing about me is I really hate talking about this subject because at the end of the day, I want to live a normal life, and I've got 2 kids, and it's kind of impossible if people know this truth about you.
Right.
So it's a bit strange for me to actually, get this information out there, because I really feel a strong desire to do so, to actually get the information I feel that I've uncovered out into the public. And that's why I wrote my 2 books, and that's why I'm here today.
So let's start with your first book. I believe that was Alien Revelations.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So kind of, not to give the book away. We obviously think it's a good read. Everybody should take some time out of their day to delve into it. But tell us a little bit about what it's based on and what kind of information you were getting.
Okay. Well, it's the book opens with my early abductions from early childhood, because growing up with it, it's really unusual, because at the time I didn't really have a handle on it at all. I didn't know what was happening. In fact, there's an experience that keeps bringing me back. Every time I start thinking I might be delusional or just lose my mind, or I just try and shelve the whole subject, there's one memory I have that just keeps dragging me back. And it's when I was about 6 or 7, maybe around about that time. So this is in the early 80s. I'm 46 years old right now. So we're probably talking about 1985 or 6, something like that. And I remember being laid in my bed and hearing a voice in my head. And at the age I was at, I just thought, this is just normal. This is like having an imaginary friend. Because back then, it would just, you'd see things like that in the media. And I just thought, I've acquired a friend. So I was just talking to this voice in my head. And it was I can't remember how it all started, the conversation. But I remember it asking me, would I like to see a spaceman? And at the time I was like, yeah, yes. And then I thought, well, what if it's scary? So I started sending it like, perhaps if you look like an Ewok, like from Star Wars, or there was another character, like a Muppet kind of character from
like you better be cute type thing.
Yeah,
right?
exactly that. Yeah. And it's like, just come and look out your window. And I was like, okay. So I climbed out my bed and I whipped open my curtains, and hovering just on the other side of the glass outside my 2nd story bedroom window was a grey with its arms spread wide, just sort of looking down at me. And I remember just being absolutely instantly terrified, because to me, those almond eyes, they look evil to me. It was like like a frown almost, if you know what I mean. So I just thought, monster, you know what I mean, instantly. And at that moment, the memory just stops, like I'd been knocked out or whatever. And I remember waking up the next morning and knowing I'd seen something, knowing I'd seen a real creature, but not really knowing what it was. And because I was so young at the time, I thought maybe it's some kind of owl or just some kind of animal I hadn't yet come across. Because I was so young, I just thought maybe it's just some part. Because you're still learning about like things like lemurs and crazy animals that you've never seen before at that age. You still feel like there's more to see and learn. So I remember going through all my mother's wildlife books, looking for this weird creature that I'd seen out my bedroom window. And it's that reaction that keeps grounding me to the fact that this really definitely happened, because I remember all those events afterwards, like researching this thing and not knowing what the hell it was, and then not actually realizing what it could have been until 1995, when I first started dipping my toes into the subject of alien abduction.
Right.
And yeah, and it's that sort of loop of events that just keeps bringing me back in, because it's like I can't just dismiss it. That definitely happened. That was definitely outside my bedroom window. And if that was true, I've got a ton of other memories from just, throughout my childhood and throughout my early 20s that sort of follow that same pattern. And also seeing the same kinds of things in the early hours of the morning, just waking up and seeing things in my bedroom. And yeah.
So Michael, you've had these instances, like you said, it was 30s by the time you stopped having these experiences?
Yeah, 2008.
Okay. So from a toddler age to the age of 30, you're having these experiences. And the thing is, there's a lot more complexity behind this than you can possibly explain, right? There's
Yes.
tons more.
Mhm.
And I understand that. Have you noticed a change in the dynamics or the interactions that you were having with these entities? And what I mean by that is some people say from an early age, so toddler years to being kids, they usually have a more positive experiences with these entities or almost considered friends of sorts.
Mm.
Then it changes throughout their teenage years where there's more sexual reproduction experiments and stuff like that done on them, or at least investigations. Then it turns into a full-on nightmare when they grow up to be adults.
For me, it sort of became, I mean, it was always terrifying. Having the thing is, when you see one, it's probably the most terrifying experience, because there's something about seeing something that's sentient, intelligent, probably more intelligent than you, that's completely not human, and it's in your environment. It just, it's instant paralyzing fear, even from a really young age. When I was, I want to say 13, is when it started turning towards, you know, the sexual kind of interest and surgical procedures and things like that, which I didn't really know fully until I was, I want to say 18, when I had my first hypnotic regression. Because the experience in particular that I'm thinking about, it was when I was staying at a friend's house. It was out in the countryside, in the middle of nowhere. And I remember in the middle of the night, being let, because we were sleeping top and tail, because we're like teenage boys, obviously having to share a bed, and you know, sleeping top and tail, fully clothed with our street clothes on, because obviously, you know,
We've all done that in the 80s, right? 80s
yeah,
and
exactly.
90s,
In the
we've all
80s in
done that.
particular,
Yeah.
yeah, you couldn't have it get out that, you know what I mean?
Yeah,
You share a bed with
exactly.
your friend.
You
Yeah,
shut your mouth. You don't tell anyone.
exactly
Yeah.
that. Yeah. So yeah, at the time, I remembered waking up in the early hours of the night, feeling completely violated, like something terrible's just happened. And I had this weird sort of, how to describe it, desire to hold on to a memory. It was like I had this feeling that I was about to lose something, and I was struggling to hold on to this memory. And what I retained was the image of an upside down train carriage in the sky and a glass elevator. And those are the only two things I could hold on to visually in my mind. But I remembered being completely, just emotionally, just completely distressed. I also remember I realized I was laid not top and tail next to my friend, and I was just like totally freaked out. So I jumped out of the bed, well, slid out of the bed as carefully as possible, and I noticed my trousers were like half up, and I was completely exposed, and my buttons were all wrong. So I remember sorting myself out and then getting back into bed the right way round, not knowing what the hell had happened. And then flash forward probably 7 years, I sought the help of a hypnotic regressionist in my area. The subject of UFOs had just exploded in like the early 90s, and there was an organization called BUFOSC, British Research UFO, something Cheshire, I can't remember, it was something like that, and it was headed by a guy called Eric Morris, who was a naval nurse who picked up hypnotic, I don't know, techniques while he was in the Navy. And he got us interested in the subject, and he was just going around the area. You know, he put an advert out in, I think it was UFO magazine at the time, with a phone number, just saying, you know, offering the services as a hypnotic regressionist. So I called him up, he came around, and first thing I wanted to know about was this upside down train carriage and this, you know, glass elevator. So in the regression, I couldn't believe how visual it was, because once I was under, as soon as I started just remembering the events in sequence, it was just completely clear. I could see it all as it was. So what had actually happened is in the middle of the night, I saw a shaft of light come through the curtains, and I saw shadows on the other side of the window, and these creatures came into the room. It was all kind of blurry because I couldn't really focus, because at the time I was completely paralyzed. I remember being taken through the window, flying up to a cigar-shaped object that had windows along the bottom. So already I've got my glass elevator and I've got my upside-down train carriage.
Right.
And as we went up, I remember being led into a sort of I mean, the first room, it was like a cylindrical room, and it had like a conical ramp. So it was like I came up through a manhole kind of thing. I was dragged to the side, led up this ramp down a corridor and into it was like a operating theatre. I remember being laid onto it. I remember them taking something from my rib cage, so in my side, and then after that there's a bunch of procedures, really unpleasant. I remember a needle going in the back of my head. That was absolute agony. And I remember seeing a being there that had brown skin and it wrinkled features. And I remember it saying to me, because I remember, I can't remember what I'd said, but it was something along the lines of you're not going to get away with this. I'm going to tell everyone. And I remember him saying, you will not remember this. So then that just, it put something in me where I bloody well will remember this. You are not going to take this away from me. And I remember after the event, when they brought me back down into my bed, just trying to hold on to the memories and realizing that they were leaving me. I was losing my recall of what had happened. I couldn't put it in sequence anymore while I was laid in my own bed. And so I just thought, grab onto something. So I just remembered that craft and the fact that I flew up to it. So I just thought it's the simplest way I could put it. It was an upside down train carriage and a glass elevator. And that's the only memories I could retain from it.
Yeah.
But yeah, it was crazy that, because I had those two images in my head for all that time, and it just, in context, it just made complete sense. And the feeling of violation. In fact, I was so angry, I was fighting them off while they were trying to dress me, and that's why when I ended up in bed, I was just completely, basically half naked. But yeah, it was just, it was crazy to me at the time that it was just, and also just seeing it in the regression, just seeing, you know, having it all confirmed, just, you know, seeing them like face to face, like close to me as like, you know, a teenager. And it was just madness.
And Michael, did you have any smells, or is there any smells that sort of trigger anything for you?
Yeah, there's a few. Wet soil, you know, freshly dug soil.
Yeah.
And also cat litter.
Okay.
It's a stale.
The ammonia smell, I guess, eh?
Yeah, and a bit mixed in with a bit of BO.
We heard that from James Fox as well, right?
Okay.
James Fox mentioned something like that. Witnesses smelled something very similar to that, ammonia, and the wet soil is not uncommon. It's that or wet pavement that's been really, really hot, like during summer, triggers something in people as well.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and a bit like hot radiators as well. There's a tinny edge to it. That's where I get the wet soil from, because it's like a metallic tang.
I think it's ozone. You know that smell when you get after it rains in the spring for the first like 5 minutes? It's a strange, and it doesn't last because ozone's not a stable molecule, but or people, they do it to their car. If you have a car that has an odor you can't get out, they use an ionizer or like an ozone machine, and it literally changes the chemistry of the smell. So a lot of people do have these similarities of ozone and ammonia, oddly enough, for whatever reason. But
that makes a lot of sense if you're in an electrically charged environment as well.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, like the smell of like a neon sign going on. It gives off kind of like a tinny, you know exactly what it is, right? But
yeah.
But I wanted to ask you, you mentioned early in the show that throughout the course of the years of having all these experiences, you've met a whole wide cast of characters, you know?
Yes.
Maybe elaborate a little bit on that. Who were some of these creatures and kind of what were their characteristics?
Right. Well, I mean, the main one in particular is the brown wrinkled entity that I mentioned just a moment ago. He's really striking in appearance. He's got quite a long neck, quite muscly neck, and his head's huge. It's shaped like a heart, and it's got a trench running down the middle of it, and like bone spurs, sort of like connecting. I remember when I first visually remembered it as a teenager, I just thought I must have made it up because it looks too much like it. You know, the Klingons in Star
Right.
Trek with
Yeah,
with the ridges. It was a bit like that, but like mixed in with like other science fiction-y kind of characters. Because it had the bug eyes, it had a flat nose with two like slit nostrils and quite prominent bony features. Smaller eyes than the greys, but still quite large with thick eyelids. I've drawn him loads. It's because he's visually quite striking, and it's actually quite hard to get him wrong when you're drawing him.
He's a repeated figure for you?
He is, absolutely,
Okay.
yeah. In fact, the strange thing is, every time I see him for the first time, well, throughout my childhood, I'd be terrified because he looked almost desiccated, like a mummy, like dried skin, and it was kind of brown. But actually, throughout the experience, by the end of it, it feels like I'm with a friend, because unlike the greys, it feels like you're talking to a human with him, because
Right.
it's more, it's not audible, but it's, you hear it in your head kind of thing.
Okay.
Whereas with the greys, it tends to be a lot more visual. So it's almost like there's a bit of audible quality, but they send you images a lot more, like flash images. And but he had a weird sense of humor as well. Like there's one occasion where I met him. I was in it was a weird kind of classroom environment. It was almost, because I was led into a room and it just looked like a classroom on Earth, except it stuck in the 1950s because it had the weird desks with the attached chairs and the lifty lids and the ink wells, which I had not experienced at this age. For me, I grew up in the 80s. It was all like plastic coated wood and, plastic chairs. And I remember when I first saw him, I was absolutely terrified, and just he just totally threw me back, and he put the words in my head, literally, why are you scared, why are you so afraid, this is a huge opportunity, you're meeting a literal creature from another world, what the hell's wrong with you? And then he started just sort of insulting me, just calling me like stupid monkey and things like this, and it was just his insults were getting sillier and sillier, and as he insulted me, I started getting angry. I'm like, you brought me here, it's not my fault. And I remember just shouting back at him, just shut up, you brought me here, or something like that. And then he started laughing at me. And then as he was laughing, I started laughing. And then the way he explained it to me was, your fear is like an egg, and I can't get you out of the fear. You have to do it for yourself.
Right.
So literally, all I have to do is provide the right environment to actually bring you out of your own fear. So I took you from fear to anger, and from anger to humor, and now we can talk like equals. And as he explained it to me, I was like, this is a remarkable creature, because it worked. It was the psychology of it just made complete sense to me. And I think he's kind of helping you from behind almost, whereas it's, because the idea of laughing after I've been that mad seems a bit wrong, but his humor was so infectious, it just sort of brought me up into it. So it's like the guiding you from both ends. So it's like there's the physical reality of it, but there's also a deeper connection going on. And it's sort of the way they communicate, you sort of partially in their heads as well, if you know what I mean.
Yeah.
So you sort of feel it's a weird two-way streak. But yeah, it's so there's him. There's a female grey, which I'm kind of scared of more than of him, because she just looked like a normal grey but taller, slightly smaller eyes, and she'd wear a hood, but she wouldn't say very much. But she did use any painful procedure, she'd get me to look in her eyes, and she'd black me out. So she was the one that sort of did that kind of thing. But because she was a bit more mysterious, I kind of, and creepy looking as well to me. Yeah, she gave me the heebie-jeebies. I've seen mantises, I've seen giant reptilians. Yeah, there's quite a lot. Weird little snake-looking dudes. Yeah, quite a lot.
Have you ever seen any humans?
Not that I can recall.
No.
I think I've encountered hybrids, but no humans.
Okay.
Was there ever any communication in terms of where they were coming from, any particular star system, or any kind of biological explanations of why they all look so different or anything like that?
Yeah, a little bit. From him, I got his homeworld, which is a snowy, icy planet. It's the cities, they live in these circular cities that I think they have stable populations. So basically, the populations don't rise or fall. So they have these set circular cities and then no like little countryside,
No
housing
suburbs.
or anything. No, nothing like that. It's literally everything's contained. They build weird follies as well. Like there's this one city, it's in a mountain, and it's a shaft, and then around the shaft there's these buildings, and in the middle there's a bridge that goes halfway across, and then there's a tower suspended at the end of this halfway bridge. So it looks impossible, but it's just they're like playing with gravity. So it's they build these impossible structures that they look old to us, like almost like monastic or medieval, but they defy gravity as well. There's another one where it's like a wheel and it's got 4 bridges that extend from the outside, and then there's a weird temple-like structure just suspended in the middle above the city. Yeah, and one of the reasons that they look alike as well is I'm pretty sure that they're all offshoots of the same species. A lot of them are, not all of them, sorry. So basically, when they colonize a world, rather than terraforming completely a planet, they adapt themselves genetically to adapt to the planet. So they end up looking completely different. But
It's your process, right?
Yeah. Because it's why wipe out life that might already be there to, I don't know, plant your own food and things like that. Because I mean, you know, if we landed on an alien world, we probably wouldn't be able to process the proteins on that world, or you know, the slightest bacteria might completely wipe us out. So rather than wipe out life that may already be there, you just adapt yourself. So, you know, if the hybridization is a thing between species, which I'm really skeptical about, but if it is a thing, I'd imagine it'd be quite a useful tool if you was having to adapt to other biospheres.
Why are you skeptical about it? I'm curious to hear your thoughts.
I just think genetically and chemically, just the odds of being able to, because an amino acid to us might do something completely different to a completely different species, because chemically we might even be the same chemicals, but the way they're organized and the way they're structured might be completely different. I just think the possibilities, there's just too many different, you know, iterations of biological life in my mind. I think, you know, the old argument that, you know, why would they have 2 arms and 2 legs? I think that isn't a very good argument, just because I think it's a very useful shape to build cities and technology and things like that. I think, obviously, you know, thermodynamics produces the same solutions to entropy over and over and over and over again. So you know, it's the same. You know, this crabs. There's, you know, in the sea, there's so many different species of crabs that are absolutely not related. It's the same solution, just keeps popping up to life at the bottom of the sea. I think it's something like that. You know, but I think, you know, the ability to genetically splice 2 completely alien species, just, it doesn't make sense to me. I just can't see it, you know. So I might be completely wrong, but
that makes sense if you're trying to breed like an elephant and a mouse, right? They're so far apart, it's not going to work. But what about slight mods, or people that have reported that they've been abducted, some genetic material has been removed and then paired with some other, perhaps more closely related material?
Hybridization, right?
Yeah, hybridization, or it's like a genetic boost somehow. It's an upgrade. They're just slightly tweaking it. I mean, the difference between all the dogs in the world is less than 1% of their DNA, right? So it doesn't take much to affect massive change So it wouldn't have to be on the polar ends of it. But yeah, like this just, it seems like a common theme in so many abduction cases that there's genetics involved.
I do think there's because on my last regression, I got some information that I don't really like much because it's too specific, and it was that the greys themselves aren't actually aliens. That they are augmented humans that have been augmented to live in space, and they're the ones that are hybridizing. They're not hybridizing; they're rejuvenating their own genetics from old stock, our stock. So basically, in the regression, I was told that we actually had contact with aliens. Our first civilizations did have open contact. It was one way because basically we didn't have the technology to, go to them.
Yeah.
But they had the technology to come to us. And basically, there was a cataclysmic event. And to preserve the old culture, rather than keep the contacted culture on Earth, they took them out into space and gave them the job of basically watching out for life on Earth, basically preserving us. The whole thing, I hate it because it sounds so science fiction, but the information I got was Earth was discovered millions of years ago by a completely different alien race, an ancient alien race that basically realized that life on Earth would never advance to sentience. The reason being that we're in a singular a mono star system. We have only one star in our planetary system, and the problem with that is after the accretion disk collapses into planets, you've got a lot of junk in your solar system, asteroids and comets and things like that, and over time you get asteroidal or comet bombardment on all the planets in the system, so that life, while it can get a hold, will have these terrible cataclysms that will just keep resetting the clock. So you don't have a big enough window to actually reach sentience on your own.
And that's happened 5 times throughout history.
Yeah,
There's been
exactly.
5 major extinctions of global extinctions, right?
So the message I got was that sentient life tends to develop on binary star systems, because in a binary star system, what happens is that all your long elliptical objects, which are the ones that cause the problems, because as they pass through asteroid belts and things like that, or through planetary orbits, that's when you get all your problems, because these are fast moving objects that basically cross and intersect stable orbits, and those are the things that keep getting lobbed at us. Within a binary star system, basically anything that's on a long elliptical orbit starts interacting with the other star, because you've got 2 large masses in this system, and basically it either ends up just, I don't even think it does hit the star. I think it literally just gets fired out into space, or I don't know.
So because of the gravity of these binary stars, is that why?
Yeah, it basically destabilizes the orbits of elliptical orbits, because it diverts them rather than going on a big loop over.
Gives
and over
the planets
and over
more opportunity to have longer life cycles.
Exactly.
Well, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So basically, your climates are more stable over a longer period of time, and that's how sentience develops. So our star system, it can never do that. Every million years or so, we get an asteroid or comet impact that resets the clock. So basically, these ancient aliens, if you want to call them that, trademark, basically, they found the species most likely to develop sentience, and they accelerated them genetically to actually develop culture and civilization. And then I don't know how or why, but I think the Graham Hancock Younger Dryas impact theory and all that nonsense, basically, which I don't like this kind of stuff because it's too Star Trek. But that, whatever that was, why it happened or how it happened, I don't know whether we pissed them off or what happened, but basically we did get reset, and that was the point when open contact ended. And the message I got was a number of humans were basically taken off world to live out among the stars with the technology and the gifts that they were getting from the actual aliens, and that's who the Greys are, and that's why they want to rejuvenate their genetic stock, and that's why they're doing all the hybridization, things like that. It's not hybridization, it's just resetting. It's medical intervention, if you will.
Yeah. We spoke with Dr. Paul Masters, and he's got a theory on extraterrestrial model, which is kind of like what you're talking about, which is, people from the future and future descendants that are coming back and doing this. The complexity of not only the abduction phenomena, like what I've always been fascinated by is that, people say they're in these crafts, which you think cost-wise, not just materials, but just the way that they manipulate the materials to make these crafts, and just we're blown away by these crafts, right? But imagine what else they got going on, right? What else they got up their sleeves. Like, it's amazing technology. But these crafts have these rooms that are designed to have a human lay down on a table with medical devices that are made to do whatever it is that they do to us. That is a major venture. Like, they build a craft with these operating rooms in them, and that means there's a purpose there, and it's a serious purpose. And this is a theme that we hear quite a bit, that people are brought into these rooms, or separate rooms. Even Betty and Barney Hill went to separate medical rooms inside the same craft. So this, for me, has always been something that I look for the details in what people say, because it's important. We find commonalities to it and start saying, and we mentioned this before, is there's two possibilities. There's no third, there's no fourth. It's two possibilities. Either one, it's a new mental illness that millions of people across the world are experiencing similar, experiences and similar patterns, but not all the same. They all have their differences. Or it's actually happening, right?
Yeah.
So there's just two possibilities to this. Like I said, there's nobody's on drugs. We have people from all walks of life that have been, like, even people inside the Defense Department, for crying out loud, are experiencing the same thing as you are. So it's huge. It doesn't exclude anybody. It's not particular to any specific person. They're all just randomly selected.
Yeah, but then there's a spectrum of data as well, in that it's like, even my own data, I question it, and it's coming from me. Like,
right.
That last regression, because it felt like a seance. It wasn't a normal regression. It was like I was having a dialogue with them in the room. It was really weird. But because it wasn't as concrete as my first regression, I'm almost ready to dismiss it. But the thing is, I mean, that's me and myself. That's my data that I'm skeptical of. But then you've got other people that I believe are genuine abductees, but I also think they might have gone off the rails at some point, started believing that they're Jesus, or, things like that. So it's a really hard subject to actually just, I don't know. It's hard to get people to take serious, because it's so wacky in parts, what I mean? So it's like, because I really like, I like the science, I like the I like things to be concrete. And the thing is, for me, I feel so much shame around this subject. My kids don't even know that I've been through any of this. I've kept it a closely guarded secret. My wife, actually, she would like to talk about it sometimes, but when she does, I just go, no, because I feel like I lose so much credibility just talking about it.
Right.
It's like
even to your own spouse, though, Michael.
Yes. Yeah.
Oh, really?
Yeah. Even then, the thing is because we've been together since the 90s. When she was there for me when it all started coming out, she wasn't there for the regressions, but she knew they were happening and things like that. And then the last regression that happened, she walked in the room because she finished work early. Not the last one, my second one with Eric. And she got to hear some of the details, and it absolutely terrified her, because basically what she realized, that she was in the room when I was getting taken away. In fact, in one of the regressions, I actually remembered trying to wake her up, and not having a voice. Literally, really strange experience. A grey had entered my room, and because every time I see them, well, not every time, but most of the times I see them, they paralyze me, and it's really, I don't know, oppressive experience. But during this particular experience, one entered the room, messed with my paralysis, so I could feel waves of sort of like the grip of it, if you know what I mean. I could hear sounds that would like change in tone, a bit like the old hearing test, when they do the tone test. So it's similar to that, but not quite. And I could see strobing lights, and they would like change in frequencies and things like that. The thing did all this and then just left. So as it left, I sat up and saw my missus, and I thought, I need to wake up. So I tried to say her name. Nothing came out. So I had full control of my body, but no voice. And so I just started trying to, make that kind of noise. Nothing's coming out. And then suddenly, like a switch, noise started coming out. And then she wakes up. She's like, "What's up?" And I'm like, "Oh, nothing. I just had a nightmare." And she heard this during the regression, because what I actually remembered at the time was I remembered my cat coming into the room, me being completely paralyzed, and then the cat leaving. But then when I sat up, the cat was sat on my legs, so it didn't leave. It was there all the way, but it did, which is weird because I've heard that animals are sensitive to these kinds of things, but it was completely oblivious apparently. But yeah, she heard all this, and then she was terrified at the time. So then I learned to sort of keep it to myself, and that became a habit where I don't want to talk about it, if you know what I mean, because it's just a case of I didn't want to scare her. I didn't want to drag her into it, but I also, at that time, I really wanted to explore it more. So I just sort of kept it from her. And now when she asked me about it, I'm like, no, you're all right. Because I think over the span of 30 years, it's just become so much easier just not talking about it, just keeping it to myself. So,
Right.
Yeah.
And I wanted to ask do you have a theory on why it was repeated? Or, like what, look, I want to get into your second book as well, because I find that very fascinating.
Yeah.
Before we get into that, just because I know people are going to want to know what, yeah.
So what was it again? The question? Why me? Sorry. Yeah. Like,
is it generational? Anybody else in your family?
I think it is generational, but I think specifically, I think it might be genetic, because I did a DNA test. My missus is quite into her ancestry. So for one, I think it was Christmas or my birthday, I can't remember, but she got me a DNA test kit, and it came back, and it's the most boring. When you get the map and it shows you where all your family's from and where you spread, literally the UK, nowhere else.
So you're purebred.
Just a blob. Yeah, but also completely vanilla and boring. So, but I think if you are harvesting genetic material, a good base of data, so you can say that, it's because if you've got a mongrel animal, and you take the DNA from it, it's probably quite hard to figure out, what goes where with with the ancestry and things like that. I think with me in particular, I think I am, because I'm so boring, I think literally I make a good donor genetically. I think it's quite useful, because I don't know, maybe I literally, I've no idea, but I do think that's got something to do with it, just because it was so surprising when I got that map and it was just a blob and it was the UK. It's literally right where I live.
See, I'm afraid to do that test, because I'm afraid it's all going to point to the same house.
Yeah. Yeah, honestly. Yeah,
but good point though on being very kind of lacking mix. If you look at Rh negative blood type, the predominant area for that is in the Basque region of Spain. So why just a very small amount of people have a particular blood type that doesn't mix with anybody else's blood type anywhere else in the world? It's very rare. I mean, there are people that have more rarer bloods than others, but to have such a high population all carrying, and I mean, even pregnant women have to get tested for Rh negative, because essentially they could reject their own baby if it is of the other blood type, right?
Oh,
so it's a real thing. I remember my wife doing the test when we were pregnant, well, I should say when she was pregnant. I was the emotional pregnant guy, but yeah, the Rh negative is a real thing. And genetically, there is a small portion of people that have that. And nobody can really explain why that specific blood type is so much unlike all the rest, right? So there is maybe something to that small space having some significance.
I don't know if this has any significance, but I'm at the opposite end of that. I've got this blood that everyone can have. I don't know. I can't remember what it's called. Is it
Like a universal donor type
yeah.
thing?
Yeah, I'm one of
Yeah.
them. Yeah, I can't remember what it is, but yeah, I've got that. So that might be useful as well. You know,
And-
if you're taking blood,
Yeah,
goes everywhere.
Michael, I got 2 final questions about the abduction stuff, and then we'll move on to the second book.
Okay.
So, have you had any ill effects or any ailments develop over the span of your life because you think it's related to these experiences?
Oh, I did. I have the faintest of scars on my rib cage when
Right.
from the one that I got regressed. You know, the big surgical one.
Okay.
And I did wake up one morning with a completely swollen earlobe and blood on my pillow. And then for about a decade after that, I had a lump in my earlobe, just a tiny, like a little ball bearing, which Eric, my regressionist, the UFO researcher, was like, you have to get that taken out. Go to your doctor, tell him you've got something in your ear, you need it taken out. And I was terrified, and I never did. And then it dissolved. It just seemed to get smaller and smaller and smaller, and it disappeared. Other than that, not really, because I know because I did have some interactions with Kim Carlsberg, and I know she had a lot of nosebleeds and things like that of that nature, which she associated with an implant in a nasal cavity. But yeah, nothing like that.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then the second question was, because this might be something that follows your family line, it could be that, dates back quite a bit. Most people come to grips with it or start talking about it in our generation. It seems to be more prevalent. We're like, hey, wait a minute, something's wrong, something's off. Are you worried at all? Because I know you're not talking to your kids really about it, but are you worried that this might pass on to them?
I did, really did, very much so, especially when they were young. I think that's why my abduction stopped, because I think I was dealing with the experience very badly once I had kids.
Gotcha.
Because it's one thing to have an intruder in your house when you're just you and your girlfriend or wife or whatever. But as soon as you put kids in the picture, I'm a feral animal. I can't, you know what I mean? It's and I think I had some. There was one where they actually used my son's voice to get me to come to them, which did not. That scared me because
Crossed the line, right?
it really did. Yeah. My son, when he was about 4, he started. He might have been younger than that. He might have been 2 or 3. But basically, when he graduated from a cot to a bed, in fact, I think it might have been when he got his own room. He started coming into mine and my wife's room and just sneaking into bed with us. And at the time, I was working crazy hours because I was working in a bakery. So I was looking up solutions online and things like that. And basically, what I came up with is, if you reverse a door handle, the turny, the long handles, if you swap them, the front from the back, or is it you turn it upside down? I can't remember. But basically what happens is you have to turn it up rather than down to open the door. So I did that, and it worked, because he came to the bedroom, rattled the door handle, and I just heard, you know what I mean? And I was like, I got out of bed, led him to his own room, and he had a good night's sleep, thank God. And I did too. And from then on, he never did it again. But then I forgot, I just couldn't be bothered changing the door handle back round. So a couple of weeks after that, I woke up in the middle of the night and I could see bright light coming under the door. I was completely paralyzed. So I woke up paralyzed. Like, it's just sleep paralysis, because I do suffer both and they are fairly indistinguishable. So I just thought it might be sleep paralysis. But then I realized there's light coming underneath the bedroom door and I could see shadows moving around. I'm like, oh no, they're here. And panic starts setting in, and then the door handle rattled. And I'm like, okay, that's weird. And then the door handle rattled again. And I'm thinking, well, what if it is my son, And I started thinking about, am I a terrible parent just laid here when my son's at the top of the stairs, potentially could fall down? I didn't think this through, because what if I had sleep paralysis while I was trying to open the door handle, and I'd start panicking that way then? And the light disappears, and then I just hear, Dad, Dad, literally the exact same words I heard when he first came into the room. So it's like they literally plucked the exact audio recorded in my brain and played it back at me. So then I'm like, it's okay. And I jumped out of bed, opened the door, and then there's 3 greys on the other side of the door. And the last thing I remember is the front one just putting his hand in my face and blackout. And I was furious, because they'd not only were they in the house with my kids, but they'd used my kids to sort of get to me. And I was stunned that I couldn't figure out a door handle.
Yeah, why did they just float through the door?
Yeah, well, no, actually, I do think there was a reason for that, because at this time in this period of my abductions, there was finding weird ways to get to me. Like, one of the ways, he actually got me to sleepwalk into my living room before they revealed themselves. But I did get the message that I had a huge conifer tree outside my bedroom window, and I remembered the brown fella saying to me, "You really need to cut that tree down. It would make things a lot easier if you cut that tree down." And I think, for whatever reason, I do, like, they probably can pass through organic matter, but I think it might leave a trace, and I think that's why they couldn't do it. So they were having to get me. They was having to go into my garden and come through my house to get to me. So on the occasion after that, they actually got me to go downstairs into my own living room, open my curtains, and they told me to look at a specific spot in my garden. And I couldn't, nothing there. I'm like, there's nothing there. And so, no, look again. Actually, I say they said this to me. At the time, I thought my cat was talking to me, because I was in a semi-dream state at this point. Because basically, I remember waking up and hearing my cat in my head saying to me, "Go downstairs. There's someone here to see you." I'm like, what are you on about? And I remember going downstairs in this fugue state, and my cat telling me, "Open your curtains, look in this area of your garden." And I'm like, "There's nothing there. You got me out of bed for nothing." And no, look again. And I looked again, and they appeared. It was like a special effect. It was like they color filled in. It was like there was nothing there a minute ago, but it was like they would always been there. Part of my brain always knew they were there, but they just sort of appeared, like filled out like smoke. And I remember snapping out of the paralysis, snapping awake, then snapping out of the paralysis and battering on my living room window. I remember running to my dining room, opening, struggling to open my back door, running out into the garden, and then I don't remember anything after that. But I did realise a couple of days afterwards, I actually got into trouble. My wife was like, "Why has this back door been left open?" Not only left open, unlocked, it was literally open. So literally that night, whatever had happened, I hadn't obviously reclosed or relocked the door, and it was just flapping in the wind, and we hadn't noticed for days. So I was in it at that point. But it was just all around that time. It was a case of, because what they'd usually do, they'd come through my bedroom window. So it was literally, I'd wake up paralyzed, they're in, and then I'm out, and then it's all done with. But while I was living at this one house, because of the layout, they had to find weird ways to get to me. And that's round about when my abductions actually stopped, because I think I was misbehaving quite a lot. I mean, literally banging on my window, screaming profanities at
Too
them.
much work, right?
Yeah, literally.
Too much work,
I think,
yeah.
Yeah, I was a bad customer.
Yeah. So do they always come in threes?
Yes. The ones that come to get you are always in threes.
Okay.
Always. Yeah. For me, I don't know if that's everyone, but for me, always in threes.
Now let's get into the nuts and bolts aspect, which is my man's.
Yeah, I love the title of this book, How to Build a Flying Saucer. So right off the bat, I'm sure people have a field day. I'm sure you've got comments like, "How do you know? Nobody knows. UFOs aren't real." There's 1,000,001 skeptic questions that can come. But let's talk about what's in the book. I find it fascinating. I find it's plausible. If you are, people that have encounters have reported ESP and sort of like telekinetic messaging. So why not a big download of information of very high level scientific things that you maybe would not have known any other way? So tell us a little bit about the book, what kind of info you got, and what you wrote about.
Yep, sure. To be honest, I don't know when I got the information, but I know it was there. The way I knew it was there is because this started in 1996 when there was a TV show called Future Fantastic. It was because it was height of the X-Files, and it was hosted by obviously Gillian Anderson. Who else? And literally, she was basically outlining science fiction concepts and the kind of work that was going on that would lead us to those futures. And basically, the one that triggered all this was one on propulsion. And there's a little segment of it where they talked about a guy called Thomas Townsend Brown, who was a scientist in the 50s who was researching something called electrogravitics. I remember watching the show, and they were showing archive footage of his apparatus and how it would work. And basically, if you looked at it now, you'd say, oh, it's just a ionic lifter. So basically, it's generating, it's ionizing the air and generating a polarity, electromagnetic field, so that the charged air particles are being magnetically attracted, and that's what's lifting the thing. But there was something about it that I recognized, and I couldn't for the life of me figure out what it was. It was just this weird switch in my brain, and I just thought, I know what that is, and I know how it works. And the thing is, the stuff in the video, I think it was probably an ionic lifter, but the shape it had and the arrangement it had, there's another way to make something like that work using actual gravity. And so I did a bit of research, and it turns out that the inspiration for his electrogravitic apparatus came from observations he made on an X-ray tube called a Coolidge tube. And basically the way it works is it uses an anode and a diode. I can't remember which is which. It's embarrassing, but one of them's tungsten, and I think it's the anode that's just a piece of wire. And basically what it does, it creates a huge differential between the two charge points. And what he was doing, he was overcharging them, and he observed that it moved towards the diode, I think it was, the positively charged side, and if you put it on a pendulum, basically it would move towards one way. And he thought this might be an indication of electromagnetism and gravity being interlinked. So basically he spent his whole scientific career trying to uncover this phenomenon and make use of it. But what I realized is what it's actually doing is, when you create a huge charge differential, what you also generate is a lot of kinetic energy. So in the positively charged side, which doesn't actually, it's not the side that's holding the electrical charge, it's the opposite side. You generate a lot of motion, a lot of movement. And when, like, with like E equals mc squared, when you get close to the speed of light, basically you increase in mass. There's more than one way to move. Basically, you can move in a straight line, as we understand. If you move close to the speed of light, time slows down and you increase in mass, so you get heavier effectively. But you can also move by oscillating, by vibrating. If you take any object with mass and oscillate it fast enough, you generate the same effect. You generate more mass, but you do it in it's a tiny amount, but it's constantly changing. So what you're actually doing is you're generating waves, gravity waves, just because you're effectively taking an object and increasing its mass and decreasing it rapidly. And what that does, it generates a kind of wave. if you, I mean, I could go into the complete breakdown, which is what I seem to be doing here. But basically, if you take the same model, the same object that the apparatus that Thomas Townsend Brown had, and make some minor tweaks, you can basically get it so you've got a gravity wave generator. So you've got your positively charged terminal of your apparatus, and you've got your negatively charged terminal, and your positive charged terminal. It's generating a lot of kinetic energy, so in the form of vibration. What's also happening is because you've your negative terminal, the kinetic energy is actually moving towards and away from the negative terminal, so it's actually moving in a straight line. So it's amplifying the effect. And also, if you use the right kinds of materials, you can get it all working in lockstep together. So basically, you're generating all this kinetic energy. If you go to a high enough frequency, you can generate gravity waves. And if you shape the whole thing into a parabola, like a bowl, you can get those waves to combine and focus on a single point in space. When you do that, you generate something that doesn't occur in nature naturally. You generate a linear gravitational field. And once you've done that, basically your whole apparatus, is literally sat within its own gravitational field, separate from any other field around it. And depending on how it's orientated, it'll either generate an area of space that you can reverse the gravity on, or if you have it orientated so the point is pointing towards the Earth, the whole thing becomes weightless itself. The apparatus itself becomes weightless, and anything within it is only feeling the effects of the gravitational field generated. So, which would be really useful for a craft. You know, it's
very much like what Bob Lazar said, right? Essentially creating a bubble or something less affected by the normal physics we would expect. But my question about all this is,
sorry, I went off on a tangent there.
No, it's okay. That's totally fine. It's a lot. And again, reading the book would obviously make a lot more sense than we have
there's diagrams
time for here. Yeah, but you know, we chatted with Dr. Gary Nolan a little while ago. He's talking about metamaterials potentially creating a waveguide. So it's the material themselves or the propulsion system. But my question to you is, why is this not more out in the open? If it is simplified enough that we can discuss it on a podcast, why don't we see this everywhere?
Well, the thing is, to actually do it, you have to go from an engineering point of view. If you was going to build a capacitor with a huge electrical charge, you wouldn't make it out of a very thin material, because obviously it would degrade faster and fail. But to make the most out of this effect, you want the maximum amount of surface area. You want it as thin as possible. So basically, it's really easy to control all those oscillating atoms. And you'd want it spread over a large area. And in science, there's no reason to do that. No one would ever do that, because obviously it would fail. Speaking of the metamaterials, they're perfectly arranged to actually work with this concept, because basically what you've got is you've got a very thin semiconductive material separated by a resistor. So basically, if you alternate positive, negative, positive, negative, positive, negative in the wafer that you've got, and also the extremely thin layers, you will get the maximum effect of this, you know, atomic oscillation. I think it's literally what the hulls of these crafts are made out of. I think it's why they glow. I think it's why they ionize the air around them. I think it's why they're shaped the way they are. I also think it's why they behave the way they do, why they defy gravity. I also think it's why they come in the, I mean, all the shapes are constructed of parabolic shapes, like a tic-tac, a cylinder, a sphere,
an egg,
a disc, an egg. Yeah, exactly. Also, your triangles have three orbs, you know, parabolic shapes on each corner, and quite often one in the middle as well. Also, even the weird ways that they behave, like the falling leaf pattern that some people have observed, works really well if you are just using a single amplifier. So basically, you don't want to just turn it off, because if you do, it's going to fall. And also to build up the charge necessary to generate the effect, it probably takes time, because it's like a tuning fork. You're trying to get the right frequency for it to work. So to descend, if you don't want to come down really, 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 really slowly by just slightly lowering your gravitational field, a good way to do it would be lower it, but also move forwards so that your gravitational field's offset and angle downwards. And then basically what's going to happen is, over time, aerodynamics and just it's like a spinning top. If you think about a spinning top that's slowing down on power, as it powers down, it wobbles.
Yeah.
So basically what's happening is the disc itself is wobbling on its focus point as it's powering down. So as it's descending, it's flipping up in a sort of falling leaf kind of pattern. Because
I always thought those were the new drivers, like the people that just started flying the crafts. Like, as you wouldn't give them a big mission, the first time that they're operating would be, okay, let's take it easy. Let's go park over there by the trees.
I think it's also the guys in the cheaper cars as well, the ones that don't have the reversing cameras or whatever.
Yeah.
But, there's something else I want to go in. Oh, Bob Lazar as well. Because a lot of what he says makes sense if you've been studying this technology but not quite understanding what you're seeing as well. Mm-hmm. Because in his descriptions, basically the waveguide of the craft emits gravity waves which cancel out gravity. So basically the waves are going up and that's cancelling gravity coming down. But to me, that's like using a wave to try and reverse a flow of water. It's not going to work. What I think has happened with that particular craft is basically you've had a lot of scientists looking at it, coming up with various solutions to how it actually works, and actually getting it wrong. And I think the reason we don't have this technology with us today is because they've basically put it all down to this mysterious element 115, which converts into antimatter, which generates weird gravity waves, which they think emits from this aerial shape. But actually, what's actually happening is all that antimatter and element 115 is doing, it has two purposes. The element 115 is really good for focusing the gravity amplifiers in the base of the craft, which I never actually wrote about, but it is basically what you do with that is you have a stack of amplifiers. You have the element 115 actually at the focal point of the amplifiers, and then you pull it, and what that does is it sharply bends the gravitational field, because it's like sort of like a needle and thread just sort of pulling that focal point. And what that actually does is it creates almost like a very narrow beam of gravity at the other end. So that's why the element 115 exists. It's not to generate the entire gravitational field, but what they've basically done, they've seen these materials that cannot be replicated on Earth and just gone, yeah, we can't really use this device, because if we do, we're going to run out of the materials, and therefore I think they've shelved it. But what they've not realized is actually the hull of the craft, because all that antimatter is doing is just generating power. So they're converting 115, which is also used to focus the amplifiers. They're using that to convert to antimatter, and then they're using that to generate electricity. And that is being used to power the hull. Because, I mean, the fact that the thing glows like this, and also is clearly designed to hold a massive electrical charge, like the fact that there's no sharp corners within the craft, there's no other materials other than the steel that it's made out of.
Right.
There's no point where you're going to get electrical arcs happening, because it's holding this massive electrical field. So basically, if you're in this craft, because your charge is the same as the craft around you, you're not getting shocked.
It's like a bird on a wire. He doesn't
exactly
get
that
unless he was touching the ground at the same time.
Exactly that. And basically what it's doing is it's charging up the hull, which is actually the engine, which is why when the Roswell wreckage was recovered, there was no signs of any engines or power plant or things like that, because the power plant would have been really, really small. By Bob Lazar's description, it was just a basketball-sized thing.
Yeah.
And basically, there's no engines, because your engines are actually your hull. It's, if you think of like the sails of a ship, it's
It's
you
the
know what I mean?
surface
It's
area.
exactly that. So, and I think they might have realized since then how this stuff works, because there's these patents that came out where it clearly is that it is the hull, it is the craft itself that generates the field. Because if you actually look at the really, really vague and low resolution, these patents, but they clearly know what they're talking about. But I think back in the 80s, I think they had no idea. I think they were still thinking it's like you need dilithium crystals and antimatter to make the warp reactor work. So therefore, yeah, we'll just put it on a shelf until we can like open trade and maybe, or make with particle accelerators the right isotope of element 115 to actually make the whole thing work. But because that's not happened, but I do actually think now since then they have figured it out. But at that time, I think Bob Lazar was really there. I think he's absolutely telling the truth. But I also think it was bad science that I was reporting on. It was just
well limited science, because I mean, keep in mind it was 1989. They didn't know what they were doing, and when
Exactly.
you read his book, you realize that they hired him. He sought out a gentleman that got him the job at S4. He was like, "Hey, do you have a job for me?" He had no idea that this guy was going to put him in the middle of one of the most groundbreaking event in human history and trying to reverse engineer these crafts. But they thought, man, this kid thinks outside the box. He put a freaking rocket engine in the back of his, was it a Honda or something like that? Like, just crazy. And like, he was able to think outside the box. He's never proclaimed that he was like the world's best scientist, but he knows enough science, like, to put like a freaking particle accelerator in his garage if he wants to. Like, he's that freaking smart. Like, he'll build stuff for George Knapp. We were talking to George Knapp. And he's like, George was complaining about a fan or some sort of, air conditioner. Oh, I'll build you one. And he just build him a unit and send it to him. Like, the guy's freaking smart. But limited information back in those days. And
like I said, I don't think it's his fault. I think it's the textbooks that he was reading that was wrong. Basically, it's the science that's been done through the 50s to then, where they've got it wrong. Like thinking, because I think what the waveguide actually is, I think it's a deionizer. Because basically, if you want to depower the craft, you can't really earth it. So what you need to do is fire off ionized gas to lower the charge of the whole craft. So basically, straight from the reactor, you just shoot plasma out through that. It's basically an exhaust. And that basically depowers the craft, and that's why that waveguide's there.
It's like a blow-off valve for the extra
exactly
static.
that. Yeah, it's like the whistle on a steam train. That's all it is. But they've decided no, that's the whole engine. That's the thing that gives it anti-gravity. And it's not at all. If you look at the whole shape of the thing, it's obvious what it actually is. And the way it worked for me as well is I sort of try to uncover it. I could feel what was right information and what was incorrect. So I'm not a scientist. I don't have an education in this at all. So basically what I've done is I've looked up basic electromagnetism books and things like that. And I've just tried to just follow the trail of breadcrumbs. And that book is the result of what I've come up with. So it's probably riddled with mistakes, but it's my best attempt with the information that I've got. And I think basically what's happened is I've received this information while I've been abducted, when I've not had the recall. I don't have the memories of these events, but I still have the information that I've retained. That it's almost like a gut feeling. It's like I know what's right and what's wrong. So when I saw Thomas Townsend Brown's apparatus, I looked at it and I went, I know that. I know how that works. I don't know how I know, and I don't know what I know at this stage, but I know it's focusing something. I know that shape is really important, and I know it's focusing something. I don't know what it's focusing or how it's working at this stage, but over the years, I was able to just put the pieces together, and that's what I've come up with. And it's my best attempt, but it does really work really well with just sightings in general, like even crop circles. Because if you've got a point 90 degrees from the outside surface of your craft where it's the whole craft is pivoting on this point. So all that gravitational force is focused at one point. If you dip that into a cornfield, it's going to flatten the stalks. And not only that, the whole thing's ionizing the air around it. So it's like they're in a microwave. The water inside, you know, is oscillating, softening the stalk so that when they bend, they stay bent. They're not breaking or anything like that. And it all works. It's the whole thing. If you just put the whole model, you know, next to the observed, you know, sightings and things like that, it works. And I've not been able to find one yet that breaks the whole theory, if you know what I mean.
Yeah.
Like even Travis Walton. Travis Walton. Sorry, I thought he had another name there for a second. But no, I think what he came upon was a guy trying to start his engine in his craft. I think that craft, for whatever reason, whether it was the atmospherics, maybe it was too humid, but I think they'd lost a lot of charge in the craft and they're trying to power up to leave.
And he was too close to it. Yeah.
Exactly. So he was hearing all these odd noises. He said he could hear clanging noises. And I think there was literally trying to tune the oscillations of the craft itself to generate enough kinetic force within the actual skin of the craft to actually generate the field that they need to take off. And he got too close because obviously it's having to power up. It's having to electrically charge the entire outer skin of this craft. And I think because of the humidity or whatever, I think it was hit by a stray arc of electricity, which kicked off the whole event.
He's got his event is amazing because it's the first one that I know of that his life has been, or a life has been actually saved by these entities, because he recalls it now as being more of a rescue mission. He got too close. The charge came in. He got, basically injured. His friends left. They weren't just going to leave him there. So they helped him out, because he said when he woke up, and the painting behind me is kind of like the Travis Walton experience. Like he woke up with pain in his chest. And by the time his eyes were able to focus, he noticed 3 little entities around him. And, they were trying to rescue his life. Like he said, like the whole time that he was on the craft and all this stuff was happening, his chest was killing him because of the charge. So he's got a fascinating story. I think your story is fascinating as well, Michael. I know that it's difficult to come out and talk about this. And obviously now it's out, and we got several thousands of listeners that will listen to this, and I deeply encourage the listeners to follow Michael on his social media. He's on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram as well, and to purchase the books. I mean, you're a rational person. You're sane. When we talk to you, you're not crazy. So. You're not. Yeah. Well, you know what? These experiences are insane, but you are a sane person just going through insane experiences. Louis, do you have any final questions for our guest today?
No, I think it was again. It's a difficult topic to breach because of the amazing claims, right? Like having these experiences, getting this information. You're not the only person to have had similar experiences. So it's not like you're going against the grain, but it is a rarity. We don't hear it very often. Again, I have a bit of a science mind. I liked your theory on why these things glow, because they're ionizing the atmosphere around them. It makes a lot of sense. I often wondered, like, we wouldn't know a plane was flying by at night unless it was flashing. So if they didn't want us to see them, and in some cases it appears they don't want us to see them, but yet they still light up. And I just thought that's so stupid. Like, it's either a light or a craft. Why would they not? But it makes a lot of sense that it could be the craft itself. Or, I'm a big Formula One racing fan. If you watch any of the nighttime races they have, you see the rotors on the cars glowing red, the ceramic from absorbing the heat. So anytime you have huge forces and huge energies going through materials, it's not uncommon for them to glow. So that was new for me. And I consider myself pretty knowledgeable on this type of science anyway. So again, I commend you on your courage. I'm sure you've had your fair share of critics, people that say, oh, it's all bullshit. How can you prove it? But it's like any abduction experience. They're less likely to care what other people think because you know what you saw, you know what happened. And I'd imagine it's probably similar with you as well. Like you said, it's a gut feeling. You just kind of know. And it's difficult to explain, but you just know. So,
yes.
Yeah. So, again, very fascinating. We can always do a follow-up to this one day. And if anything comes to you in future regressions or anything, let's talk about it. Let's approach this from as many angles as we can. Jason and I always do that. Our UFO people get mad when we talk consciousness. and the spiritual minded people get mad when we just talk about little grays, but we need to look at this phenomenon from all the angles. So,
Yeah.
So before we close out, where can people follow you? Do you have a particular website or any pages that you want to direct people to?
Oof. I can't remember any of it. I think my Twitter's mostly Michael, or it's just Michael ALANS at Mike. I can't remember. Same with my Facebook. Basically, if you Google me and it's a picture of the brown alien that I was talking about earlier, that's the right one, because I use that a drawing that I did of that guy for basically everything. So if you find that guy, that's me. And yeah, and you can find my books on Amazon. I just wanted to say as well, I think Travis Walton, I think he's probably the world's first case of intergalactic hit and run, because I think literally that's what happened.
There's no insurance claims for that, right?
Yeah, I know, exactly. Yeah, thank God they did something about it and they're responsible. But yeah.
So also, people can look you up on Amazon, like you mentioned. The books are called Alien Revelations, and the other one's called How to Build a Flying Saucer, A Beginner's Guide to Gravity Amplification. You can also find Michael on alienrevelations.co.uk. I'm not used to that. I'm on the Canadian side. I'm sort of used to .com or .ca. But definitely, Michael, be more vocal about this. I know you've done several interviews and you've been on TV. Like I said, I wasn't too happy with some of the way that you were treated in the past, and I wanted to give you, the opportunity to come on and talk to Louis and I about this on a serious level, and to address many things that haven't been addressed before. Like I said, we're big and appreciative on the fact that you came on today and were able to talk with us about all this. And it's good. People like yourselves are what's helping disclosure come to fruition.
Lovely, thank you. It's been really nice talking to someone that's actually read any of my books, because you are rare.
Well, you know what? This subject, unfortunately, not everybody researches it. Louis and I have been at it for a while now, and it's interesting. There's a lot of commonalities. There's a lot of pieces to the puzzles, and a lot of threads that people have said that are similar things. And it's building this bigger and bigger. We're getting more and more of an idea. But at the same time, Michael, I'm not lying to you. We are thrown into the rabbit hole. There's a bunch of theories out there that we have to explore, because there's so many facets to this phenomenon. And it's not only the physicality of these crafts, it's the entities and the cerebral aspect, like, the control over oneself, the paralysis, the consciousness aspect. It's such a complex, interwoven issue that it merits looking at everybody that has something to say on this issue. And like I said, you're logical, you're rational, your books make sense. You're scientifically inclined, which a lot more than I am. Like, you understand science, and Louis and yourself could get along fine on that department. Michael ALANS, I thank you so much for coming on the podcast today, and we'll have you again sometime.
Thank you so much for having me, and anytime. Lovely. Thank you.
Perfect. Thank you.